Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to spend most of this video reading you some of the comments I received in response to my video last week about rejoining the EU. Some of them are quite entertaining. Before I do that, though, I would just like to briefly touch on the two main stories of last week. Johnson at the COVID inquiry and Sunak's desperate bid to make his Rwanda project work. I watched most of Johnson's appearance before the COVID inquiry, and I must say he looks a much diminished figure these days. I know he's desperate to leave some sort of legacy and to restore some sort of reputation, but it was a pretty miserable performance, and I don't think he did himself much good. But I think what I thought about this whole COVID inquiry and his appearance and so on was the amount of chaos that there was in Downing Street. I mean, we've seen it from so many previous witnesses. I mean, everything was an utter chaos. It is no wonder that bad decisions were made and wrong decisions were made, even though we're being told all the time that he got all the big calls right. And it occurred to me, the crucial period for this COVID was January to June in 2020. And somehow or other, that's the one period when none of Johnson's WhatsApp messages are available. All other messages either side of that period are available. For some reason, during that crucial 6 months when all the decisions were being made, the messages have all gone. And we as we keep being told, one of the three great centres of IT in the world. That's us, China and America, and we have MI6, we've got MI5, we've got GCHQ, one of probably the most sophisticated spying station in the world, and yet nobody can figure out any way of getting back those WhatsApp messages. Just that 6 months, the crucial 6 months when all these important decisions were being made. And it's the same with Lord Bethel, who was at the centre. He was awarding a lot of these contracts. He was very much involved in it. He lost his phone, then he gave it away, or he'd forgotten what happened to it, he'd cracked the screen. Anyway, his phone's not available either. And it's the same with the Prime Minister. He's changed his phone, so all his WhatsApp messages can never be recovered because he's now got a new phone. And then you look at Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, at the centre of the whole of this thing. And just before this section of the inquiry started, a month or so ago, he suddenly became ill. Nobody knows what's wrong with him, but he's really, really ill. Couldn't appear. But he will be back. He's going to be off for a few weeks. I think just until the end of this section of the inquiry, then he'll probably come back again. So you've got the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the guy who was dishing out the contracts, the Cabinet Secretary who was involved in all of this, and none of them are able to give evidence concerning that particular period, concerning what happened to their WhatsApp, the what records anyway, their WhatsApps and so on. It does seem very unfortunate, and I think if anybody else were to go to court and come up with such a ridiculous set of excuses for refusing to deliver up clear evidence, which no doubt incriminates all of them, you'd be laughed out of court. Anyway, the other big story of the week, of course, was Sunak's stopping the boats. I think he's losing it. I think he's off his head. I think if you watched his press conference on Thursday, I mean the guy's crazy. I mean, there is so much to deal with in this country. There's so much is going wrong. Everywhere you look, there are problems. The public services are collapsing. The economy is in terrible trouble. Massive cost of living crisis. So many people really, really struggling. So many problems. And all he's fixated on is these little boats, stopping these little boats. Last year, 2022, 1.2 million people came to this country with legal routes, with visas. Some students, some to come to work and whatever. 230 odd thousand came from India. And how many people came across the channel? 40,000. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. And what he's saying all the time now, you'll notice this, he's saying they're down 30%. Because of what he's done, they're down 30%. Let me tell you about this down 30%. Last year, between May and September, which is the peak period, 42% of all crossings of the Channel were Albanians. Now, Albanians have no reason to come to this country to claim asylum. They're not in any danger in Albania. Albania is not a dangerous country. Yeah, they were clearly. You can go to Albania and apply for a visa, you can get on a plane and come to London, no problem whatsoever. But they were coming via the Channel because presumably they didn't want people to know they were in the country. Presumably they were going to be up to no good. But 42% between May and September came from Albania. Now, all we had to do was say, look, we're not giving asylum to anybody from Albania. If you come from Albania, we'll put you on the plane back to Tirana right away. That's it. And that's what they did. And he claims they got a deal with Albania, a deal to return people who shouldn't be here to the country of origin. And that, of course, knocked at least 30% off the number of crossings. So by getting Albania out of the equation, of course they've come down. But all in all, it's not made any difference. All in all, the number of crossings are probably at a very similar level this year as they were last year. But no, he is obsessed with Rwanda. And now it turns out we're spending 290 million. I thought we'd be spent 290 million. And this is in order to swap people. We are going to send asylum seekers here and swap them for Rwandan refugees, which will come back to this country. Vulnerable Rwandan refugees. And this is what he's decided to stake his entire future on, this desperate man. This is the hill he's chosen to die on. It'll be interesting to see because there's a vote on Tuesday and see if it gets through Parliament. If it doesn't, he's then in such a weak position, it's difficult to see how he's going to survive. But this guy has blown it. You know, when, as I say, you've got so many problems to deal with and you decide to focus on a tiny little issue like this, which is of no importance whatsoever, and you're getting people fired up. We all know what it's about. It's about choosing a minority and victimising them so the whole country can get behind stopping these wicked, evil, terrible people coming to this country. They're all desperate. In the meantime, we've got, best part of 200,000 in hotels not allowed to work. It's crazy. But anyway, let's all have a laugh. Let me read you some of these comments from last week. Now, last week I was talking about the possibility of rejoining the EU and how I think it'll happen sooner rather than later. And of course, they got all sorts of people excited, and lots of people were happy to tell me how it's not going to be possible. It's been so difficult. It'll take 50 years, and all the rest of it, and why they won't have us back, and so on. I normally get from my videos quite a lot of comments, and I was extremely grateful for comments. I really appreciate that. I read every single one of them, and a lot of them are really, really interesting comments. I normally get an average of about 1,000 a week, and I got about 1,750 last week. Vast majority were intelligent, sensible comments, but the ones I'm going to read you are an example of the sort of people I think who still remain throughout the country. They still think that we were right to leave the EU. The main reason seems to be they all believe that things are worse in the EU. I can't imagine how they could be much worse, but anyway, most of these people seem to think that they are. Conditions are worse in the EU, and also the EU is very corrupt, and obviously being in such a corrupt free country, it would be terrible to have to go back and mix with all these corrupt people in the EU. So there are quite a lot of them, but let me see. The first one is from somebody called Propagandasaurus Rex. He says, the EU has no future, so why would the UK have no future without being part of an entity that has no future? Then he says, that doesn't make any sense. Well, he's right about that bit. Paul Shattuck, he says, what a load of rubbish. We have the 5th best economy in the world. The problem with our economy is that it may be the 5th best economy in the world, but very few people have got all the money, and the majority of us don't have that much money. and we're getting poorer. I. Reid says, Michael, the EU is slowly destroying its member states, removing their individual powers, little by little. Eventually, there will be no European Union. It will be a superstate, the European Commission. There is a lot more than just the economy. It is about individual freedom and democracy. The Commission is undemocratic. This is somebody who doesn't seem to be aware of the fact that we've, for the last few years, been losing rights all over the place. How you can't go on demonstrations, you can't strike anymore, you can be stopped by the police and arrested without any cause whatsoever. How they can look at your bank accounts if you're receiving any form of state any form of state help or state pension. Someone with a computer-generated name says, FK, the dirty, crooked EU, we voted leave, end of. Jeff Cropper, he says, UK has no future outside the EU, ? Let's go back to World War II. That's like telling the British people we must join the Nazi party in order to survive. Go and live with Satan and you will be okay. Lots of question marks. Graham Hall says, the UK has no future inside the EU. It's not fit for purpose. Someone called Alan Taylor, he says, this government and civil service made sure that we had Brexit in name only. Keeping, don't know what that means. Hence, we are all committed to sending ever-increasing billions to the EU. In brackets, Rishi has just increased our share, close of brackets. The EU are still allowed to fish right up to our shores. We are still in the ECHR, and we are still obeying every EU rule and EU law. We allowed the annexation of Northern Ireland to maintain their border, capital THEIR, but they can send all their unwanted migrants here, ignoring our border. We gave control of our intelligence services and armed forces to the EU and have signed up to allow the WHO to dictate UK policy for the next pandemic. This was not Brexit. It was a treasonous betrayal by the establishment to allow a future government to negotiate an EU return. I mean, how do you respond to something that is quite so deluded? I mean, where does he get this from? BMK, not in your lifetime, you old coffin dodger. This is someone called Andy Dukas. I wonder if Mr. Lambert has considered the fact that the EU will be governed by the globalist elite, i.e. World Economic Forum, United Nations, the World Health Organization. World Health Organization. These institutions want total control of the people's lives and has a plan to reduce the global population, which in my view means genocide. Do you know these people? They watch my video and then they write this garbage. Steve Willems, Brexit never happened. The COVID inquiry, nothing but theatrics for you sheep. As Nietzsche said, there's no defence against stupidity. Snowy Owl said, oh dear, this is the channel that is a belly rub for the undemocratic, whinging Remainers, still stamping their little feet over Brexit. Lambert is in his 80s. I most certainly am not. Lambert is in his 80s, and they say old people voted for Brexit. Seriously? Someone with a computer-generated name. Some people believe that we'll rejoin. Others believe in fairies. Fairy believers are by far the most rational. Di Elson. Germany's screwed. Most Germans I know want out of the EU and the return to the Deutschmark. Several people commented on that comment to say that was complete and utter nonsense. Peter Feltham said, God help us if we do. That's presumed to rejoin. I know they're desperate to get us back in, and we all know the reason. The wheels are falling off the delusionary EU project, particularly now. Even the Germans can't afford it. Another computer name. We do have a future outside of Europe. It's just like people like you. You are so negative. That's why this country is just a mess with people like you. Just look at Europe now. They are so desperate for us to rejoin. They want our money. Power hungry. That's all they are. Sorry if it's me that's stopping us rejoining. Oh, stopping us making a success of Brexit, sorry. Embalmetric. Brexit never happened. The EU made our holidays and stays a nightmare. I don't know whether it's since Brexit, but anyway, our holidays and stays in Europe are now a nightmare. But that's about it. We're still governed by their silly laws. I don't want to rejoin the most corrupt and undemocratic bloc in the world. They bled us of billions with no benefit to the UK. He doesn't want to join a corrupt and undemocratic bloc. Who on their right mind could support a bunch of autocrats we never vote for? They spend billions using 2 parliaments in different cities. Same people discussing the same things but paying a company to move their papers and stuff to another chamber thousands of miles away, talking about carbon footprint. I mean, he's got a point about 2 parliaments, and Strasbourg is obviously completely crazy that they do have to go there once a month or whatever it is. It's actually 250 miles, not thousands of miles. Harris Tweed, doesn't this Berlaymont, that's the head office of the EU, doesn't this Berlaymont stooge get tired of flogging the same old rejoin tripe? Whether the UK does or does not rejoin is all in the future, and as Lambert looks like a man who hasn't got much of one left, he'd be far better off finding another way to pad out his pension. That's pathetic, isn't it? I mean, really. I mean, if I was a sensitive soul, I might get upset by some of these things, but... Keckbrad, Remainers, stop crying about Brexit. You lost. Dry your salty tears and move on. Malcolm Parker, grow up. Roy Campbell, another Muppet. Tara 1941. You're, spelt Y-O-U-R, talking rubbish in capital letters, R-U-B-B-I-S-H. And now on a different subject, on global warming, a guy called Mark Palmer, he's got quite cross. He says, FFS, can't imagine what that could mean. Carbon dioxide is good for us. It is essential for life. It makes plants grow. Below 150 ppm, all plants and life on Earth will die. It has nothing to do with climate or global temperature. He then goes on and on and on. He talks about bogus computer models. And he says, stop regurgitating all the climate alarmist propaganda as if it is fact, and stop demonstrating your complete ignorance of the matter. Valiant Thor says, totally disagree. The EU is the root of all evil. Spelt in capitals. Someone called Chris Small, he says, what utter rubbish. The EU will fall apart before we rejoin, mate. How does he know? Mike Mines, he says that the only reason the EU SSR, see what he's done there? EU SSR would want us back in is our oil, coal and gas reserves for EU SSR Germany, and that's falling apart before our eyes. I think most of our oil, coal and gas reserves belong to international oil and gas companies. Not sure we've got much control over what happens to it. Gold Mario says the UK couldn't have kept their fishing boats even since joining the EU. Get it right, old man. Not sure what I got wrong there that I should do it right, but anyway. He then goes on to say, it's about time that Remain shits move on. The EU is doing fine without your money. Applejack says, oh dear Michael, how can anyone be so wrong on so many topics? I imagine you made sure you got all your jabs too, didn't you? Yes, got all my jabs. What in God's name has that got to do with the EU? Crazy. Some other computer name. Poland, Italy will soon leave the EU and Sweden may follow. So you learn a lot here. John McCarran, shut up. All we get is foreigners living off our backs. OJ Brickwork, countries are dropping out of the unelected EU dictatorship. No one want to be in Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, Science Project. UK has better opportunity without the EU. William Barnes, we the people voted, capital letters, to leave the EU and get out from under the unelected left-wing wokeists. We, capital letters, the people, capital letters, do not want to rejoin. The only people who want to rejoin are the Westminster elite and their sycophants who can't wait to get their noses back in the EU trough. I think they've got their noses are pretty well established in the Westminster trough. They don't even need the EU trough. Jack Spring, he says, you may want to take an honest look at the state of the countries that are still inside the EU. It's amazing how all these people know so much about what's going on in the EU, isn't it? Elfin Wisetongue, why are you putting the great people of Britain down? As always, we will win. We always do, don't we? We don't do well in the Eurovision Song Contest, but yes, we do win otherwise all the time, I'm sure. Perhaps you would be better spending your time looking into the state of the EU. Another one. Michael Holt, you're, spelled Y-O-U-R, out of your mind after all the unconstitutional heretics, I don't know what that means, unconstitutional heretics, have done. Give us some reasons why we should rejoin. Can't believe you had the audacity to talk this crap. Tricky Dick's a bit more to the point. He says, this man's a clown. He's an idiot. He's a complete fool. Mr. Powell, for you, says, I don't think we have left. Life on the Black, go take your meds, old man. There's not a chance in hell we'll ever join that corrupt place again. Mike Bamboo, he says, no way we should rejoin the EU, and I think it will break up eventually. Look at the state of Europe with mass migration forced upon us all. Europe needs to take their, spelled T-H-E-R-E, culture and way of life back and start mass deportations. Dodgement, you're a prat. That's why the Dutch want out. French will follow. Johan Bloom says, yeah, it's so much better in the EU, people. In the EU. People who believe EU is the saviour must be out of his mind. It's an elitist, inverted commas, project, and it's not in any way or form democratic, in inverted commas. I don't want to be ruled by billionaires that think they know my best. It's not benefiting normal people in any way. No, I think it'd be terrible to be ruled by billionaires that know their best. I mean, people like, for example, Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt and all the other millionaires that are in Parliament. All the problems you talk about were made during your lifetime in the EU. Never forget that you imported most of your problems. Anyone with half a brain could see the writing on the wall. It's not Brexit's fault you are experiencing problems in the UK. Bad leaders, yes. More than bad, in fact. But they are bought and paid for by the billionaires that run things inside the EU. It's total chaos, and it's really screwed up. Dogglebird says, the rump of unreconciled Remainers are now grasping at straws. They are pointing to a study at Bath University, and then he puts in brackets, do they have a university in Bath? It's not very difficult to find out, is it? You just put University Bath in Google, that'll tell you. University Bath, which supposedly shows Brexit voters are less educated and have lower cognitive ability on average. As though that proves something. In reality, it doesn't prove anything, and the alleged academics, in inverted commas, who conducted it should have acknowledged that. I think it's exactly what that study did find. It was published quite recently. Hugh Basham, Hugh Basham, he seems to know a lot about me, and he's quite rude, I think. He says, you had a small Mickey Mouse soul-trading business reliant on its relationship with the EU. My business was dependent on our relationship with the EU. I had something like 300 customers all over 5 or 6 countries in Europe, and we were supplying them constantly. So to have done that as a sole trader would have been quite difficult. Your lack of strategic thinking, intellect, and sheer arrogance meant you had no plan B when we left, which you did not see coming, resulting in your business ending. Making an awful lot of assumptions, this guy. Since this has happened, you, each week, treat, the commas on the side, us to your thoughts and views, which inevitably are so negative cynical, and misrepresent reality. More recently, they have become racist, misogynistic, and plain insulting. Your picture of the UK and mine are very different. Yours would cause most people to slit their wrists. I sincerely hope that most people who watch my videos don't end up slitting their wrists, but mine would tend to be more positive. Your views are tactical, small picture, myopic, and driven by angst created by your own failures. Mine are strategic, bigger picture, creative, positive, properly progressive. Well done, you. Stephen Mead. Rejoining the EU is ridiculous. The UK would be forced to join the Euro, the EU army. Now, I didn't know they had an army, but apparently if we go back in, we're going to have to join their army. Freedom of movement on immigration, comply with EU laws, we have to comply with their laws, and be required to pay the EU compensation. Madness. The EU is a protection racket. Hintersland. Absolute garbage. The EU is fascism. S. Whelan. Too much opinion, mate. Tip. Work with facts more and stop with the I don't know what's. Mr. Mad Dog, actually, you deluded person. It's the other way around. EU will fold much quicker than you think. As to, spelled T-O, much debt, and Germany is in trouble and can't bail them out anymore. If they try to enforce, spelled with an I, the veto removal on countries, several will start to leave next year. There would be civil unrest and rioting like you've never seen if Labour get in and try to reverse Brexit. And that's political suicide for the whole party, so it won't happen. Someone here called Essex Anglo-Saxon. I can't imagine whether or not they'll be pro-EU. The EU is about to split. The immigration is going to cause chaos. It won't be pretty. More people will die. Just a few more. Dizzy Rick. Bullshit. The EU is on the verge of breaking up. Gemma Winsett. We think we have. Let's leave, presumably. If you don't like it, perhaps you can buy a one-way ticket too. She doesn't so where. Someone called Finton Mainz, who I presume lives in Germany, and he's commented a couple of times here. He says, ignorant, arrogant, entitled Brit. We in the EU decide who joins our union. We would be mad to allow the Brits back. He then says it is precisely the arrogance of Brits like Lambert which blocks the UK from joining the EU. The sense of entitlement. We do not want you in our union, all in capital letters. Jade Harrington says, traitor. And Yorkie Gilly, he comments quite often. He says, keep it up, Mick. The doors to the old folks' home are that way. And he puts an arrow. And finally, one or two more here. Keith Emerson, he says, utter baseless garbage. Roy Simmons says, look at your age, mate. Stop worrying about it. We'll give you more grey hairs. It's not the colour there as I'm worried about, really. To be honest with you, Roy, it's there aren't many left. I can almost count them now. Truth matters. Typical cowardly, defeatist, unpatriotic Remainer drivel. Although the UK's political establishment want to rejoin the EU so they can get their greedy snouts in the trough again, Remainers just can't seem to accept that their beloved EU is failing and is only being sustained by money printing and successive debt bailouts. David Renton, the UK is doing better than every major EU country. Support for Rejoin has effectively dropped since 2016. I don't know where he's been. I mean, how can you be so ignorant? Even among Remainers, half have no wish to rejoin the EU. There is no motivation to rejoin the EU. The UK would get a far worse deal in a far weaker and poorer EU. The EU question is over. Demographics dictate that. The UK is ageing. Like every Western country, as people age, they age out of the EU. He's got this absolutely 100% wrong. It's simple maths. It's old people who voted, as you say here, David. Old people voted to leave the EU. Old people are dying now. And if you look at the statistics, 92% of young people would like to rejoin the EU. So he says it's a dead question. And every second, every month, every year that passes, support for the EU drops. Not just in the UK, but across the EU. Embrace the freedom of not being in the EU. Finally, Dave Longcock, he says, he's just a boring old fart who refuses to accept reality. What a way to spend your twilight years, obsessing over this rejoining nonsense. There's no fool like an old fool. So those were some of the views of some of the hard of thinking who still insist that we are better off having left the EU. No mention of sovereignty, but the main theme seems to be that it's worse everywhere else, and particularly in Europe and particularly in Germany. I kind of think that if we ever got to a stage where we're all so poor that we're foraging for acorns in the woods, there'd be somebody there saying, "Oh, it's much worse in Germany. They haven't got any acorns in Germany. Terrible shortage of acorns." And the fact that the only way you can justify the dreadful state that we're in at the moment is by making out that it's worse somewhere else without really any evidence other than probably than the Daily Express. It's pretty sad. And I suppose those are the people that will never be won over. I think anyone who's even half rational is realising now what a disaster Brexit has been. But anyway, there we are. If you've watched this far, thank you very much indeed. And until next week, by which time anything could have happened, thank you very much for watching. And if you haven't already subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you would do so, or if you know of anybody you think might be interested. And so until next week, thanks again, and bye for now.